once again, the Module 1 solution is intentionally designed for you to gauge your own personal technology exposure. Now, the word exposure is not used very often in formal academic cybersecurity textbooks. What you'll see instead, or you'll hear instead, are words like vulnerability and threat. And there's a lot of confusion about some of those terms and what they really are. And depending on who's writing the textbook, they can be used differently. And so what I want everyone to understand is that when we're talking about cybersecurity, we're really talking about some very basic concepts. And one of the things that leaves us in a bad place in terms of cybersecurity is whenever we're using hardware or software or operating systems that are operating, and there's an aspect of that operation where they are exposed. If they're connected to a network, that could be a network exposure. If it's if they're running in a room and it's supposed to be a place where information is considered sacred or private, like a doctor's office or an income tax agency, where your personal private financial information or healthcare information is in the mix, and someone can access the system that information is on physically while someone else is not in the room, that's an exposure. So I want you to think about this as you go into your doctor's office, health clinic, dental office, anything like that. If you're sitting in a room and you're waiting in the patient room for a healthcare professional to present, and the physical system is sitting there, that's an exposure. It's a bad one. The basis of all cybersecurity, the foundation of all cybersecurity is physical security first and foremost. If someone can lay hands on a device or a system, they can own it. Pure and simple, okay? And so what we're going to do is kind of take a look at what's going on when your own system is connected to your own home network. And specifically, there is a recording that I captured last year on the 3rd of September, but it's still a decent walkthrough, and there's it basically goes through each of the tasks that you see here. There are 5 different steps that you take. And as you're performing each of these 5 steps, the intent is to take a snapshot or to get a view of where you are now. Now, the fun part is if we discover that there are exposures, there are quick and effective ways to change that dramatically, okay? But there's a part of this I wanted to talk to you about directly in class. So this part about the firewall, right? The active firewall. And some of you may or may not be familiar with GRC Shields Up, but there's a great little utility. When you're connected to the internet, there's a website that you can access out on the internet that will assess the most common network ports on your system and give you a color-coded readout of your exposures. So I want to show you this very quickly so you know what it's like and what we're dealing with here. And then we'll talk about the last 3 measures. But please remind me here that for additional credit, we want to talk about this. We want to spend some quality time talking about this. You see, when everybody takes out the laptop or tablet that they just purchased for the first time and they set up, have we talked about the first account that's set up on a system? Right, it's in the video. And this is an example of my first account. When I loaded my laptop, I created an account called owner. That's not the best name. And I think in our previous classes, you know, what you decide to name an account is really pretty important. You don't want to name a privileged account the first account that you use to set up a device or a system. The first time you're taking it out of the box, the first time you're using it, it's going to prompt you through these steps to say, who's using this computer, right? And if you use a name like administrator or God or the boss, something provocative, right? Even owner is not the best name. So I chose that name as a point of, as an example of maybe not the best name to use. You want to use a non-intuitive, an unattractive name, but not an obnoxious name, right? So we don't want to make it an attractive nuisance. The important thing to remember is that when you first turn on your system and you're prompted to set up an account to say who's going to use this computer, you should never, ever, as in never, use that account to go on the internet. Now, they don't tell you this, but it's true for Linux machines, it's true for Mac machines, it's true for Windows machines. All of them do this. They let you go right on out to the internet and get started with your work. Because most people just want to they just want to start using their new toy. You know, who wants to go through a bunch of extra hoops? And who's really thinking about how vulnerable they are? Do most manufacturers want to sell you a device or a laptop where you have to take extra steps to protect yourself when you connect it? What does that imply about the device? Is this thing safe? Is it secure? There are all sorts of political and customer marketing interests that keep our technology companies from telling you the plain truth. But if you're going out on the internet with the first account that you have set up on your device or your system, it is the equivalent of getting into your car and getting on the fastest highway you can and not using any seat belts and disabling the airbag and juggling while you're driving and just doing all sorts of risky things, right? So in layman's terms, cybersecurity experts, some of us are pretty frustrated about this. The industry loves it when your system quits working because it gets slow, because it gets infected, because it gets unusable in a few years. When that happens, they have a new sale. People go out and they buy a whole new one. They say, you know what, I've had this for 3 or 4 years, and they just toss it, right? And this is a problem. What you should do is set up another account, and it should have a name like, I don't know, when connected. Now, this is obviously the other end of the extreme for how to name an account so that it reminds you to use this instead of the administrative account. But I literally created a local account and I called it when connected. And when do I use it? When connected. That's the account I use when connected. Now, obviously, that's not the best name. And I'm kind of sitting on the other end of the spectrum here. But the simple truth is, if you look at the privilege level of this account, if I go in here, it's configured as a standard user. The first account you use to set up a system or a device, that's a known exposure because everybody gets out on the internet and they start doing things, and you should never do that. If you're using the web or email or communications apps, networking apps, anything that's an online app or email or web, which by the way is like 95% of what we do, okay? And you're using the first account that's actually an administrator account, any interaction that you have, any interaction that you have with active links executes with your elevated privileges, root level privileges. So if somebody writes some nasty code and you click on a link in an email, if you're logged in with the first account you set up, it executes with root privileges, administrator privileges. This is by far the worst and most heinous of all oversights by any technology publisher, manufacturer. Everybody knows this. And when you're first setting up your machine, why do they give you administrative privileges with that first account? Well, you're probably going to hook up a printer, or you have a video camera, or you're going to hook it up to your big screen TV, or you're going to connect it to the network and to the Wi-Fi. And sometimes you need administrative privileges to do that. They don't want you calling them saying, hey, I can't get my stuff to work. That's an embarrassment to them, and it's frustrating for the customers. So they turn up all the dials, and that's part of the problem. You need to change a different account. You need to create a new account, and then you need to make it a standard user account, and that's the one you should use when you're online. That's what is there for your additional credit. Some of you may or may not have a separate standard user account for when you're connected online. And if you don't, you get extra credit for this solution, for creating one with standard privileges and then starting to use it. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure we called that out.
So even if you, so like pretty much, regardless of if you already like made that default account, you already used it, you can still make one.
That's a great question. So the question was, so even if you have the default account in play, you can still make one that's a standard account and start using it? And the answer is yes. You can move everything that you have set up in the first account so that it looks and acts just like, actually what you can do is there's two ways you can do this. You can move everything that's a part of your first account into the space where the second account, the workspace of the second account, once you log in the first time. So you just move it across. And then everything that you were working on before is there in your new account. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to create a second account, make it an administrative account, log in with the administrative account, the new one, go into that screen I just showed you, pull up your first account and make it a standard account. Okay? And that's the other way of doing this, is that you take your first account down to standard user. And then when you're browsing on the internet, you still have everything where it was. But what's going to happen is that as you're out on the web, I guarantee you, sometime this semester, if you implement this with your first module, I guarantee you, I'll bet you lunch at your favorite restaurant, that before the end of this semester, somebody will say, oh, I was out on the web and it kept asking me for an administrative login. Now, why would I need to log in with a root password just to read an email? Why would I need to log in and provide my administrative password when all I'm doing is opening an app, or I'm reading a web page, or I'm clicking on a link to do something with the web page? Why would it need administrative privileges in response to my action while I'm online? And the short answer is, yeah, it's trying to get under the hood. And if you had been logged in with an admin account, you would have never known it. It would have gone right on in. It wouldn't have prompted you for anything, and it would have made changes under the hood without you even being aware of it. That's the reality of the world we live in. Okay. Are there any questions about this aspect of your Windows platform? Now, you can still do the same thing in the Mac. For those of you who are Mac users, you can create another account, You can make that administrative. You can then log in with the new account that's root privileges, take the first account and make it a standard account. Yes, question.
So does this also relate to like iPads? Because when you create an iPad account, an iCloud, that's like the administrative account. So is that a bad idea?
So the question was, with an iPad, is that also an issue? And the short answer is not really. With portable devices, it's all about the user account. It's all about your Apple ID. And so if you're logging, if you sign out of that iPad and then someone else signs in with their Apple ID, their stuff and their data technically is supposed to flow into that iPad. But there are things you can do to a tablet or to your iPad to expose them terribly. And we're about to show you one of those things. Okay?
What about tablets that don't run iOS, that run Android?
That's a great question. That's another challenge. Android tablets and iPad tablets, both, neither have a firewall built in. So one of the things that's an Achilles heel about portable devices is that there are no smartphones or tablets that include a built-in firewall by default. And this is bad. This is very bad. So the only thing that's going to protect in terms of exposures to personal devices is the built-in firewall for your wireless router, which is why I've connected. So Aaliyah was helping me reset a wireless router. We're going to pull that up on the screen in a minute. We'll show you some things we want you to do with that wireless router. And it's going to be counterintuitive at first, okay? Any questions about the first account exposure? This is known as the first account exposure. Now you won't see this written up in textbooks, but you hear people like me who've been in the trenches for 25 years that have had to fix everybody's broken, polluted, corrupted, infected, ransomware devices, right? Those of us who have been on the other end that have tried to help somebody recover from that, this is something we're very familiar with and we're very frustrated about. Okay, so you have 5 tasks that you're going to do in quick succession. And if you watch the video, it'll tell you everything. But there's this bit about firewalls. I want you to actually disable your firewalls both on the client and on your wireless router and repeat the test again. Here's your GRC Shields Up test. Is there anyone who has never seen GRC Shields Up? Actually, it's Shields Up is one word. So if you click on the first link that comes up, if you click on the first link that comes up, what you'll notice is that a screen comes into view and it tells you some things about the analysis that GRC Shields Up performs on your network connection and your device. The thing that I like about this particular website is that it's done as a courtesy and it's been around for a very long time and more than 100 million people have used it safely over the last 15, 16 years, 20 years, something like that, a long, long time. You'll notice that there's a padlock in the upper left corner. So the results of your network exposures are transmitted to your screen encrypted so that if somebody's lurking in the neighborhood, they're not watching, oh, look at how bad his machine is. Ha, 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 ha. All the holes on that one, right? And that's important. If you're scanning for vulnerabilities, you don't want your vulnerabilities or exposures to be everybody's business. If you click proceed, it is going to give you a series of very annoying button options. These are the buttons. There's a file sharing, common ports, all service ports, browser header, look up specific port information, and custom port probe. What you want to do is, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. You want to find the very slender, very thin button, which is actually separate from this button and that button. And you want to click where it says all service ports. Do not click the other buttons, please. Because I get calls from students and they say, oh, I got a different result from what you did on your computer. And it's like, yeah, well, could be you didn't click the right button. If you click that button, what you'll see is a series of color-coded port assessments. If it's green, that means it's stealthy. That means a firewall somewhere between your device and the internet is screening or filtering or shielding that network port. Network ports are like the doors of a super, like a high-rise building, right? A skyscraper, a very tall building. So you have a physical address for that building, which is like your network address. But then once you get in the building, you and I both know there are lots of other doorways and portals inside that building, right? So getting in the building is one thing. Finding your place in the building to do business is another thing altogether. If you're in a 100-story building, you could be in that 100-story building to visit somebody who lives there, or to get your teeth cleaned, or to see a lawyer about a lawsuit, or to have heart surgery, right? It all depends on what businesses and individuals live or work in that multi-story building. The point I'm trying to make is that the doors and suites of the skyscraper are very much like the ports on a network connection. So your network address is like the street address, but which network port you're accessing happens to be like a floor number and a door number, okay? Now in this case, you notice that there's a blue square showing, and that means the firewall is not protecting it. It's exposed. It happens to be closed. It's not active. If you see any blue on your GRC shields up at home, that's generally not a good thing. If you only see one or two, it's not so bad, but seeing anything other than green is usually a bad thing. In fact, if you have just one, it says, hey, you failed. What I want you to do is to change the size of your browser window by zooming in or out so that you can capture the full screen shown with your results, okay? And all I need to see are the colors and the IP address. That's all I need is the colors and the IP address. That's all I need. You're going to capture the screen at this point. You could go a little bigger maybe. And then, no, not really, because we just short of it. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to do like this. Now, if you have a lot of activity, you can click this option and it'll give you a text file that gives you a printout of the port numbers. One thing I like about this is that you can hold your pointer over it and it'll give you the port number and it'll tell you something about what may be operating on there, including malware. So that's a useful feature of this website. Any questions about GRC Shields Up so far? Okay. Now, there is value in repeating the same test when you turn off the other firewalls in your local network. So what am I saying? I'm going to Control Panel, right? So if you don't have it on your start menu, you're going to type in Control Panel, and you're going to load Control Panel. And then you're going to find where it says Windows Defender Firewall, and you're going to turn Windows Defender Firewall off. And you're going to say, okay, down here. Another way to do this is to go into here and go into Security and to go into Windows Security and then go into Firewall and Network Protection. And then you can turn it off. You can click on this and turn it off the same way. One thing that's really important to understand is that you're going to run this test again. It's going to bark at you and say, hey, you're exposed. You probably want to, your network firewall is turned off. Now, if you don't see this when you make this change, it means you have an antivirus software package running on your system. That's usually what it means. It means the antivirus, the trial version of the antivirus includes firewall features, and those are engaged. If you don't see a little pop-up that says, hey, you're naked, because that's what this means. Now, that exposure is relatively low risk as long as you do something quickly to test some things and then get off. Now, what else are we doing? Now, I've connected a Wi-Fi router to my laptop so that I can connect to this Wi-Fi router and turn off the firewall. I reset it so that I could log in.